In her past life, she had spent 15 years loving a man, only to receive a single sentence in return. If you didn't look like her, I would never have married you. It wasn't until she was on her deathbed that she finally understood. For 15 years, she had been nothing but the shadow of his unforgettable first love. Heaven had given her a second chance at life, sending her back to the summer of 1982, the day the Hayes family came over to discuss the wedding arrangements. This time, she wasn't going to marry him. She had to save her brother, make money, and live her own life. As for the man who had made her trade away her entire youth, she was sorry, but in this life, she didn't need him anymore. The smell of antiseptics stung Claire's nose. The sunlight outside the window was dull and gray, accompanied by the steady beep 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 of the heart monitor. Claire lay on the bed, her chest aching as if it were being sliced by a knife. Every breath she took brought excruciating pain. Her frail fingertips were marked with heavy calluses. On the chair next to her rested a men's coat, its cuffs meticulously mended by her own hands just a few days prior. Carter stood leaning against the window, his tall, aloof back facing her, making no move to step closer. Claire knew she wouldn't survive the day. Gathering the last ounce of her fading strength, she turned to him. "In the past 15 years, did you ever truly love me?" Carter remained silent, leaving the hospital room drowning in deafening quiet. She still clung to a sliver of fragile hope, thinking that a dying person might at least receive a comforting lie. Carter turned around, his gaze so calm it was ruthlessly cold. "Claire, you should know the reason I agreed to marry you back then. If you didn't look like her, I would never have married you." The words she wanted to say caught in her throat, and Claire's vision slowly blurred. She thought of her older brother, Michael, who had suffered from a heart condition since childhood. When she was 22, he had collapsed right in the middle of the auto shop. The doctors said he needed immediate surgery, but the Davis family had no money. She had believed that marrying Carter would give her something to rely on. She scraped together every penny she had to take care of the Hayes family, but after the wedding, her brother's surgery kept getting delayed. Michael passed away on a night of torrential rain. Before closing his eyes, he had tightly gripped Claire's hand. "From now on, don't live for other people anymore," he had told her. She had cried until she passed out that day. It wasn't until today that she finally understood. The only person who had ever truly loved her had died long ago, while the man she had devoted her life to chasing never even saw her for who she really was. Hey everyone, imagine wasting 15 years just to be someone else's shadow. Today we're diving into Claire's story, a woman who bravely walked away to build her own life. Let's get into it. Darkness crashed down on her. "Michael, I was wrong. If I could do it all over again, I would save you first." The rattling sound of a desk fan filled the air, blending with the steady voice of a radio broadcaster. Claire jolted awake. She touched her chest. The agonizing, flesh-tearing pain was gone. Her hands were full and rosy, the calluses from needlework on her fingertips only just beginning to form. She sat bolt upright. On the table sat a metal sewing tin, neatly stacked scraps of fabric, and a sketchbook filled with clothing designs. The wall calendar clearly read the 18th of July, 1982. Claire was stunned. On this exact day, in her previous life, Carter and his mother had come over to discuss the marriage. She pinched her arm hard. It hurt, and tears welled up in her eyes. It was the summer of 1982, and her brother was still alive. "Claire, are you awake?" A gentle voice called out from outside the door. Her whole body went stiff. Claire rushed out of the room to find Michael bending over, lighting the charcoal stove. His frame was thin, and he wore a faded but impeccably clean button-down shirt. "They're coming over to talk about the wedding today. What are you crying for?" he teased. Claire threw herself at him, pulling him into a tight embrace. She hugged him fiercely, pressing her ear to his chest. His irregular heartbeat echoed clearly against her ear. Michael patted his younger sister's back. "What's wrong? Did Carter upset you again?" Claire shook her head. She looked up at him. "Have you been having any chest pain or dizziness lately?" Michael avoided her gaze. "I'm just a little tired, that's all. It's nothing. How much savings do we have left in the house?" Thinking she was worried about her dowry, Michael smiled. "You don't need to worry. I've prepared enough to see you off for your wedding." Claire choked back a sob. "I don't need a dowry. Use that money to go see a doctor." Michael froze in surprise. She gripped his hand tightly, every word resolute. "In this world, no marriage is more important than your life." A neighbor's voice echoed from the yard outside. "Claire, tidy up! The Hayes family is here." Claire returned to her bedroom. On the chair lay a white button-down shirt that she had cut and sewn with her own hands. In her past life, she had stayed awake for 3 consecutive nights to make this shirt for Carter. He had taken it, mumbled a casual thank you, and tossed it into a corner. She only found out later that Vivian had once praised how handsome men looked in white shirts. Claire picked up the shirt, took a pair of scissors, and meticulously removed the 2 high-quality plastic buttons from the collar. She then neatly folded the white fabric. She opened a drawer, revealing her sketchbook of fashion designs. The floral dresses with cinched waists, stylized blouses, and trendy trousers she had designed herself had lain dormant for 15 years. Carter had once told her that women should know their place and stay out of business. She closed the sketchbook. This time, she wasn't going to live by his rules anymore. Carter and his mother walked into the house. Mrs. Hayes placed a package of brown sugar, 2 boxes of cookies, and a stack of gray fabric on the table. Claire is so skilled and obedient. It's a blessing for our Carter to marry her, she said. Carter sat next to her, his gaze placid. He was wearing that familiar white shirt, looking exactly like he did in the photo taken with Vivian. Work at the university has been busy lately. We don't need a huge wedding, he stated. He looked at Claire, naturally expecting her to nod in agreement just as she always did. Michael looked at his sister, waiting for her to speak. Mrs. Hayes smiled brightly. Claire, how do you feel about having the wedding at the end of the year? Claire set her teacup down on the table. I'm not planning to get married anymore. The living room fell into a sudden, dead silence. Mrs. Hayes thought she had misheard. What did you just say? Claire repeated herself. I don't want to go forward with this marriage. Carter frowned. He assumed she was just throwing a tantrum because he had stood her up the other day. Claire, don't use our marriage as a joke. Claire was blunt. I'm not joking. Did you hear someone say something about Vivian? Carter asked abruptly. Mrs. Hayes startled, glancing toward the neighbors who were eavesdropping by the door. Michael's face darkened. Who is Vivian? Carter explained. She's just an old classmate. Someone has been spinning nonsense stories, causing Claire to misunderstand. Claire looked at him. Even at a point like this, his first instinct was still to protect Vivian's reputation. You don't need to explain. Don't you want to know what happened between me and Vivian? Carter pressed. Claire looked him straight in the eye. I don't. From today onward, that is between the 2 of you. She picked up the folded white fabric with the removed buttons and placed it back in front of him. Mrs. Hayes's face flushed with anger. Claire, given your family's circumstances, and with Carter being a university professor, where else are you going to find a better man? The neighbors outside whispered, What is wrong with that girl? Carter stood up, his expression confident. Calm down. I'll come back in a few days. Claire looked directly into his eyes. Go find the person you love. I'm busy making money. Carter froze. He had never seen this kind of look in her eyes before. There was no lingering attachment, no grievance, only absolute cold distance. Fine. Let's see how long you can hold out, he said in a chilling voice, turning around and walking away. The mother and son of the Hayes family angrily left the housing compound. The news of Claire initiating a broken engagement spread like wildfire throughout the military compound. Just wait and see. In less than 3 days, she'll go crawling back to the Hayes family to apologize. What can a woman even do if she doesn't get married? Claire ignored the gossip and shut her door tightly. Michael handed her the bag of his savings. Whatever you do, I support you. Claire opened the bag. The meager amount wasn't even 1/10 of the surgery cost. Time was not waiting for her. She pulled a wooden trunk from under the bed and took out an outdated blue daisy-patterned dress. The fabric was high quality, but the cut was clunky and unflattering. She spread the dress out on the table, took her tailor's chalk, and drew new cutting, lines lowering the neckline, taking in the waist, and altering the puffed sleeves. She took the 2 premium plastic buttons she had just removed from Carter's shirt and sewed them onto the chest of the dress as a focal point. Claire sat down and pressed her foot on the sewing machine pedal. The steady rattling sound filled the room. The entire compound was waiting to see her regret her decision. But the next morning, Claire took her first dress to the market. Her new life began from there. The news of Claire breaking off the engagement had spread throughout the military housing compound. Some felt sorry for her, while others called her foolish. Carter was a university professor. Marrying him was the dream of so many girls. Claire didn't care. She shut her door tightly. The old floral dress taken from the bottom of the trunk was spread out on the table. The fabric was good, but the design was clunky. Collar was too high, the waist lacked definition, and the puffy sleeves made the wearer look 10 years older. She grabbed her tailor's chalk, her movements decisive. She lowered the neckline into a square collar, took in the waist, shortened the sleeves, and used the leftover fabric to make a sash. The 2 premium plastic buttons removed from Carter's shirt were neatly sewn onto the chest. Michael stood outside the door, watching his sister. Are you really planning to sell that? I need to make money to pay for your medical treatments, she replied. Let me ask for overtime at the factory, he offered. Claire cut him off. No, your health can't take it. She sat down and pressed her foot on the sewing machine pedal. the steady rattling of the machine echoed. From the first cut of the scissors to the final completed stitch, Claire held the dress up to inspect her work. Michael walked in. Suddenly, he clutched his chest, his face turning pale. Claire hastily dropped the dress and rushed over to help him sit down on a chair. "What's wrong?" "It's just the heat. I'm fine," he said. Claire didn't believe him. He had hidden his condition from her, just like this in her past life. She hurriedly searched for his pillbox in the cabinet, but it was empty. At the bottom of the cabinet, she found an old paper envelope. Inside was a medical report from 2 weeks ago. Irregular heartbeat, immediate surgery required. At the bottom was an estimated cost. $1,200. Claire gripped the paper tightly. "Why did you hide this from me? You were about to get married. I wanted to prepare a proper dowry for you," Michael said in a low voice. "If something happens to you, what is the point of me having a dowry?" Michael fell silent. "From today on, you are not allowed to work overtime anymore. I will make the money." "How much are you planning to sell this dress for?" he asked. $120. Michael paused, stunned. "That's equal to several months of a factory worker's salary. It's too expensive. Who would buy it?" "The right person will buy it," Claire said, folding the dress carefully. Mrs. Miller, a neighbor passing by the door, heard this and curled her lip. "An altered second-hand piece of clothing, and you're asking for 120? Claire, did getting dumped make you lose your mind?" Mrs. Miller's daughter walked in curiously and tried the dress on. It fit perfectly, accentuating her slim waist and bright complexion. Mrs. Miller swallowed hard but still scoffed. $20. If you'll sell it for that, I'll take it. Claire took the dress back. "Not for sale." "Then you can just keep it for yourself." Mrs. Miller huffed and stormed out. "If you don't go to the Hayes family to apologize, you'll be eating dirt in the future." Claire didn't reply. She calmly packed her things into a bag. The next morning, the makeshift market near the train station was packed with people. The sounds of vendors hawking their goods were deafening. Most of the clothes here were plain and cheap. Claire chose a clean corner near the station entrance. She spread out a white cloth and laid the dress on top. Above it, she placed a small cardboard sign. "Designer dress, custom alterations available." Mrs. Evans, who was selling handkerchiefs next to her, shook her head. "No one is going to buy it at that price, sweetie." Several passers-by looked at the price tag and sneered. "Dreaming in broad daylight, huh? $120 could buy a whole pile of clothes at the department store." Claire stood with her back straight, her gaze unwavering. She knew the value of her product. She wasn't going to sell to people who just wanted cheap clothes. By noon, the sun was scorching, and still, no one had seriously asked to buy the dress. Mrs. Evans sighed. "Lower the price, kid." Before Claire could even shake her head, a voice rang out. "Did you make this dress yourself?" A young woman approached. Her eyes were glued to the dress. The clothes she wore were expensive, and her demeanor was completely different from the people around the market. "I designed and altered it myself," Claire replied. The girl's name was Heather. She had come from the city and was looking for a dress to wear to a company banquet. "Let me see the stitching," she requested. Claire flipped the dress inside out. Every seam was neat, the overlocking sturdy and secure. Heather was surprised. "This craftsmanship is far beyond that of a regular tailor. Can I try it on?" Mrs. Evans hurriedly pulled a small curtain closed to let Heather change. When Heather stepped out, the floral dress hugged her curves perfectly. The square neckline showed off her delicate collarbones. The people around them immediately gathered closer. "It's so beautiful. You look like a lady from a television station." The dress was slightly loose at the waist. Claire quickly took some pins and expertly gathered the fabric. "Give me half an hour, and I'll alter it perfectly for you." Heather nodded decisively, pulling out 12 $10 bills and placing them in Claire's hand. "I'll take it." Gasps could be heard all around. The straw sandal vendor opposite them gaped in shock. Claire carefully took out her small notebook. She clearly wrote down the customer's information and then accepted the money. She sat right there, threaded her needle, and altered the waist. Utilizing a scrap of leftover fabric, Claire sewed a detachable bow and pinned it to the chest of the dress. "A gift for you." Heather put the dress back on. It fit as perfectly as if it were custom made. She was extremely satisfied. "You are so skilled. Please give me your address. I'll definitely come back in the future." Claire wrote down the address of the military housing compound on a slip of paper. Just as Heather turned to leave, her friend who had come with her, named Chloe, immediately stepped forward. "Do you take custom orders? I want a dark red dress for my engagement party." Claire took her measuring tape and took the customer's measurements. She quickly sketched a V-neck design in her notebook. "The fabric and labor will total $135. I'll need a $40 deposit." Chloe handed over the money immediately, without a moment's hesitation. Claire tore out a receipt and handed it to the customer. You can come pick it up in 5 days. Mrs. Evans nudged Claire's arm and lowered her voice. Claire, that man over there has been watching you this whole time. Claire looked up. Across the street, a man in a military uniform stood leaning against a jeep. He was tall with a fit, solid build, and sharp, chiseled facial features. He watched her make the deal, write in her ledger, and accept the money. His gaze was calm and incredibly deep. Claire merely glanced over, then lowered her head to put the money away. She didn't pay it any mind. The man got into his jeep and drove away. As it got dark, Claire packed up her stall. She currently had a total of $160 in her bag. Upon arriving back at the compound, Mrs. Miller saw her carrying an empty bag and sneered. What happened? Did you just bring it back to throw away? Mrs. Evans, who had walked back with Claire, curled her lip. Throw away what? Claire sold it for $120. Someone even ordered another outfit. Mrs. Miller froze in shock. The eavesdropping neighbors were equally dumbfounded. At the end of the hallway stood Carter. He had heard everything. He looked at Claire, a vague sense of discomfort welling up inside him. Claire merely nodded to him in greeting, like a stranger, and walked straight into her house. Carter clenched his fists. She truly couldn't be bothered to look at him anymore. Inside their small home, Claire placed the money on the table. She separated the $40 deposit to buy materials. A portion of the money from the dress sale was used to buy food and medicine. The remaining $60 she put into a paper envelope, writing clearly on the outside, Michael's surgery fund. Claire, Michael teared up. From now on, I will save up every single day. You have to stay strong and wait for your surgery, she told him. Michael nodded firmly. Urgent knocking echoed from the door. Claire opened it to find several women from the compound standing outside, clutching fabric. Claire, let me order a dress too. Help me alter this shirt. Their attitudes had completely changed. No one was mocking her broken engagement anymore. Claire smiled, taking her notebook to jot down each person's request. She knew she had to go buy the red fabric early tomorrow at the station market. Claire woke up before the sky was fully light. She double-checked Chloe's measurements. The notebook clearly stated, dark red dress, waist 64, shoulders 36. Deliver in 5 days. The $40 deposit was wrapped separately. Her capital was divided into two, one part kept in her canvas bag, and the other sewn securely inside the lining of her undershirt. Michael stood up, intending to go with her, but after just 2 steps, he clutched his chest and coughed dryly. You stay home and rest, she said, holding him back. While you're at it, help me fix the belt on the sewing machine. Michael was worried. He pressed a small whistle used at the mechanic shop into his sister's hand. Take this with you. If anything happens, blow it as loud as you can. Don't worry about the goods. I know, Claire said, putting the whistle in her pocket and heading out to the entrance of the compound. She ran into Carter wheeling his bicycle outside. He looked at the bag in her hands. Where are you going so early in the morning? To work, Claire replied curtly and kept walking. Carter froze. In the past, she would report her whereabouts to him in meticulous detail wherever she went. This coldness made him frown. On the street corner, 2 young men secretly signaled each other and quietly trailed behind her. The fabric store near the train station was already crowded with people waiting in line. The highest quality dark red fabric had exactly 1 roll left on the shelf. Claire stood patiently waiting. When it was her turn, she carefully inspected the fabric's surface, taking a white cloth and rubbing it to test for color fastness. The sales clerk, Nancy, was a bit irritable. If you're going to buy it, buy it. Why examine it so closely? I'm making this for a customer. If there's a flaw, I'll be the one held responsible, Claire replied. Nancy looked at the design notebook in Claire's hand and suddenly realized. Are you the one who sold that floral dress for $120 at the market yesterday? The people around them immediately turned to look. It really is her. Claire ignored the gossip. She calculated the exact yardage she needed and bought the rest of the good red fabric, along with some thread and lining. A young soldier standing nearby, who was picking up green military fabric for his unit, discreetly observed her upon hearing her identity. After paying, Claire hugged the roll of fabric and walked out of the store. Behind her, the 2 young thugs immediately followed. Seeing this, the young soldier hurriedly ran toward a military jeep parked across the street. Claire walked into the narrow alleyway leading back to the compound. The hurried footsteps behind her put her on high alert. She hugged the fabric tightly, her hand discreetly slipping into her pocket to grip the small whistle. Just as she turned the corner, 3 strange men blocked her path. The ringleader, Marcus, smirked. Little lady, you're doing business in this area but haven't paid your stall fee yet? I don't rent a fixed stall, Claire said, taking a step back. Around here, I make the rules. Marcus stepped forward. Hand over $50. I don't have any money. I spent it all buying fabric, Claire said, scanning her surroundings. Not far away, an old woman was sitting at a drink stand. The thug next to him, Lenny, lunged forward and snatched her canvas bag. Thinking quickly, Claire dropped the roll of fabric, using it as an obstacle, then pulled out her whistle and blew it with all her might. The shrill screech pierced the air. "Robbers! Help! Robbers!" she shouted loudly. The old woman selling drinks jolted in surprise and stood up. Marcus cursed and reached out to grab her collar. Claire twisted her body to dodge, but her outer bag was yanked away by Lenny. Her measurement notebook and a few loose coins scattered across the ground. "Grab her," Marcus barked. But before he could even touch Claire, a solid hand clamped down on his wrist. The grip was so crushing that a faint crack of bone could be heard. Broad daylight and 3 grown men are cornering one woman. An ice-cold voice rang out. Marcus roared in pain and turned to fight back, but a swift kick sent him flying to the ground. Claire looked up. The person standing in front of her was a military officer in a pristine uniform. He was tall, his gaze as sharp as a knife. The young soldier with him immediately subdued the other 2 thugs. Commander Luke turned to the old woman selling drinks. "Ma'am, did you see the whole thing?" "I sure did. These 3 blocked her path and tried to rob her bag," the old woman hurriedly testified. Private Tommy, the soldier accompanying Luke, quickly picked up the notebook and the roll of fabric. Luke looked at Marcus's gang and decisively gave the order. "Take them to the police station." The thugs panicked and begged for mercy, but were immediately dragged away. Luke turned back to look at Claire. Catching sight of a light scratch on her wrist, he furrowed his brow. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Thank goodness the fabric didn't get dirty," she said. Luke watched her actions and spoke in a deep voice. "Goods can be bought again. A person getting hurt cannot." Claire took her notebook back from his hand. Luke glanced at the name written on the cover, Claire. She was startled. "You know me?" "Saw you at the market yesterday," Luke said bluntly. Tommy, standing nearby, chimed in. "This is Commander Luke, newly transferred to the military district, miss." Claire blinked. Commander Luke. The very man the neighbors had been gossiping about for the past few days. "Thank you, Commander." She maintained her politeness. "Thank you, Commander Luke." Luke glanced at her heavy roll of fabric and torn bag. "Get in, we're heading back past the compound anyway." Claire was about to decline, but Luke had already told Tommy to load the fabric into the Jeep. "We aren't driving you out of our way. We're returning to the guest quarters right behind the compound." Once in the car, Claire opened her notebook. A torn corner of the page had smudged a customer's measurements. She concentrated on recalling the numbers and quickly overwrote them with her pen. Sitting in the front seat, Luke caught her working diligently through the rearview mirror. "Aren't you scared, getting robbed like that?" he asked. "I am," she replied, "but the customer has already paid me. I can't keep them waiting because of my own problems." Luke fell silent, a fleeting look of admiration in his eyes. The car stopped at the compound gate. Michael was already waiting. Seeing his sister step out of a military vehicle, he rushed over in a panic. Learning that she had been cornered and robbed, he repeatedly thanked Luke and invited him inside for a glass of water. Luke declined, citing an appointment. He watched as Claire quickly carried the fabric into the house, preparing to spread it out on her cutting table. Before leaving, he told Michael, "Her wrist is scratched. Remember to disinfect it." That afternoon, while Claire was measuring the fabric, a young soldier brought over a small box. Inside was a brand new V-belt and a bottle of sewing machine oil. Commander Luke said these were in the old supply room, and it'd be a waste to throw them out, so he sent them for your family to use, the soldier said before quickly running off. Michael tried installing the belt. It fit perfectly. "This Commander Luke is really thoughtful." Claire looked at the new machine belt and carefully jotted a line in her personal notebook. She didn't like owing anyone, even for something small. When night fell, Claire lit a lamp and continued cutting fabric. Suddenly, urgent knocking sounded at the door. Claire opened it to find Carter standing in the hallway, his face incredibly dark. "Claire, come out here. We need to talk." Claire stepped outside. "What is it? Who brought you home today?" Carter demanded, his brow deeply furrowed. "I heard you came back in an officer's car." "It was Commander Luke." "Since when do you know him?" Carter lowered his voice. "Do you know what people in the compound are whispering about? You're a girl. You need to care about your reputation." Claire looked at him, her eyes completely cold. "I was robbed in the alley by the station today. He saved me." Carter was stunned. "You didn't ask if I was hurt," Claire continued. "You only care about what other people are saying." Carter was left speechless. He looked awkwardly at the red fabric inside the house. "You don't need to try so hard with all this just to spite me. Stop the sewing. I can help you pay for your brother's surgery." "No, I don't." Carter fell silent. "Dola 1000. 200 was an enormous sum. He couldn't afford it. Claire smiled faintly. If you can't help me save my brother, then don't stop me from making money myself. Carter grew angry. He was about to grab her arm when heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed from the end of the hallway. Luke, accompanied by Tommy, was approaching. Seeing Carter, Luke merely offered a polite nod. Tommy stepped forward and handed Claire her metal whistle. Miss Claire, your whistle fell at the police station. Commander Luke picked it up for you. Thank you, Claire said, taking the whistle back. Luke glanced at the bandage on her wrist. Did you manage to recover the customer's measurements? I remembered them. I'm currently cutting the bodice. Tommy teased. Our commander rarely remembers other people's business. Luke shot Tommy a look, and the young soldier immediately fell silent. Claire couldn't help but laugh out loud. Her smile was radiant and natural, devoid of the hesitation or fear she always showed when facing Carter. Standing nearby, Carter went completely stiff. He had never seen her smile at him like that. For years, in front of him, she had always been careful with every word and expression. Luke glanced at the roll of red fabric on the sewing table and calmly commented, "This color is beautiful." My customer thinks so too, Claire replied with a smile. Luke nodded in greeting, then continued walking toward the guest quarters. Carter watched Luke's retreating back, then turned to Claire. Do you like him? Claire looked at him with a strange expression. He and I just met today. Then why do you smile at him, but you're always so cold to me? Because he helped me when I was in danger, while you only came here to interrogate me. Claire, don't be impulsive. The elders of our two families haven't even... I'm busy making a dress. The delivery won't wait for me, Claire calmly interrupted, turning around to walk into the house and closing the door behind her. Carter stood dumbfounded in front of the tightly shut door. For the first time, he felt completely shut out of her life. Returning to his own home, Carter sat down on a chair in frustration. His mother walked out from inside the house and handed him a letter from the post office. Carter, it's a letter from Vivian sent from the city. Carter tore open the envelope. Inside was the familiar, delicate handwriting. Carter, I will be returning at the end of this month. Vivian was coming back. That was the news Carter had waited for all these years. But that night, holding her letter in his hand, his mind was completely occupied by the radiant smile Claire had given Luke. For the first time, he felt his heart was entirely empty. Claire pedaled the sewing machine continuously. The dark red dress for Chloe was gradually nearing completion. On the table were her order book, fabric scraps, and the envelope containing her brother's medical fund. Carter walked into the Davis household early the next morning. He carried a book on fashion design and tailoring that he had just bought in the city. Claire. Claire stopped her machine and looked up. What is it? Carter placed the book on the table. I happened to see this, so I bought it for you. Claire looked at the book. In her past life, she had desperately yearned for this exact book. Back then, he had coldly told her that she only did trivial sewing and didn't need to read much. Now, she had 15 years of experience and countless original designs of her own. How much was it? She asked. Carter frowned. It's a gift. You don't need to pay me. Right now, our relationship isn't one where I should be accepting gifts from you. We've known each other for years. Knowing each other doesn't mean I should accept your things, Claire stated decisively. Carter sighed, assuming she was still angry. Vivian and I are just old friends. She's coming back soon. Claire didn't ask further. She pulled out 2 bills and placed them on the book. The past is the past. Now, I can buy what I need myself. Carter looked at the money, a lump forming in his chest. He took the bills, left the book, and turned to leave. Do you really want to draw such clear boundaries with me? He asked, stopping at the door. It's precisely because there's nothing left between us that boundaries need to be clear. How I've treated you over the years. Have you forgotten? I haven't forgotten. I remember that you never once sought me out on your own initiative. I remember that I always had to read your mood. I've never been good at expressing myself. Not being good at expressing yourself and simply not caring are 2 different things. Carter froze. I don't want to use other people to make you jealous, and I certainly don't need you handing out charity in the form of concern, she said. Carter looked flustered. I'm not jealous. I'm just worried about you. You don't need to be. Carter crumpled the bills in his hand. He realized there was not a single trace of warmth left for him in her eyes. The sound of a car horn echoed from outside the compound gate. The people in the housing blocks curiously ran out to look. Vivian is back. Look, Miss Vivian is back. Carter walked out to the gate. A young woman wearing a brightly colored dress with lightly curled hair stepped out of the car. In her hand, she carried a luxurious leather suitcase. Vivian smiled and approached him. Carter, it's been a long time. Mrs. Hayes hurried out to greet her, enthusiastically grabbing her hands. Carter looked at Vivian. He had always thought he would be overjoyed to see her again, but at this moment, His mind was entirely filled with Claire's recent words. Vivian noticed his absent-mindedness and asked softly, "Are you not happy that I'm back?" "Not at all," he replied briefly. A clueless neighbor casually remarked, "Vivian just returned, and Claire just broke off her engagement. What a coincidence." Vivian was startled and asked, "Claire? The girl who used to always follow Carter around?" Carter frowned, unconsciously correcting her. "She wasn't just some girl following me around." Vivian looked at him in surprise. Claire stood at the door of the Davis house, looking out. The sight of the two of them standing side by side used to be her nightmare in her past life, but now, she merely turned her back with calm indifference and went inside the house. That afternoon, Chloe and Heather came to the Davis house. Heather was wearing the altered old floral dress again, her figure looking incredibly graceful. Chloe slipped into the newly finished dark red dress. The deep red color accentuated her fair skin, and the high-waisted design made her look tall and radiant. "It's so beautiful," Heather exclaimed in admiration. Chloe looked in the mirror, extremely satisfied. She pulled out the rest of the money and handed it to Claire. "You are so skilled. At my engagement party next week, I'll introduce my friends to you." Mrs. Miller, who was standing outside the door and saw this, immediately hurried in hugging her daughter's old shirt. "Claire, can you alter this shirt for my daughter?" Claire didn't bring up the past, calmly accepting the shirt. $5. You can pick it up in 2 days. Mrs. Miller quickly nodded and paid the money. Vivian was walking by and saw the small Davis house bustling, with people coming and going. She realized that this girl was not at all devastated as she had thought. Right at that moment, Miss Harper from the Women's Association walked into the house. She placed a list on the table. "My unit has 6 people who need 6 performance dresses in 10 days. 6 dresses?" Michael asked worriedly. Miss Harper looked at Claire. "Will you take the order?" Claire did a quick mental calculation. She couldn't finish it alone in 10 days. "I'll take it, but I need a 50% deposit up front, and the customers must arrive on time for their measurements." Miss Harper nodded and immediately pulled out the deposit, placing it on the table. Claire turned to the 2 neighbor women who were eavesdropping. "You two know how to overlock and sew on buttons, right? I'll hire you to help out, paid by the piece." The 2 neighbors happily agreed at once. Vivian stood outside, witnessing the entire scene. She hadn't expected Claire to be able to calmly coordinate the work like a real shop owner. Carter stood behind Vivian, his eyes glued to Claire. He had never seen her as confident and radiant as she was in this moment. After the customers left, Vivian took the initiative to step into the Davis house. "Hello, I'm Vivian." Claire gave a polite social smile. "I know." Vivian closely examined Claire's face, noticing a few similarities between the two of them. She spoke gently. "About the broken engagement, if it has to do with me, I can explain it to you." "No need. It has nothing to do with you," Claire replied nonchalantly. "So, you really don't like Carter anymore?" "That is in the past. If you understand him so well, the two of you are a great match." Vivian paused. She had wanted to see jealousy, but Claire was frighteningly calm. Carter, standing at the door, heard those words and his heart tightened. "Is it that easy for you to push me away to someone else?" he asked. Claire calmly replied, "You wanted to seek her out from the start. I'm just putting everything back where it belongs." That evening, the Hayes family made a feast to welcome Vivian. The meal included fried chicken and many other delicious dishes. Mrs. Hayes continuously put food onto Vivian's plate. Vivian cheerfully talked about the city, concerts, and her friends who had studied abroad. Carter sat opposite her but was constantly distracted. He remembered the bowls of egg noodles Claire used to cook for him whenever he stayed up late writing articles. Vivian placed some food on his plate and smiled. "Carter, I'll be staying in the city for good now." Carter hummed a vague response, showing no sign of excitement. Vivian noticed the anomaly and asked softly, "If Claire comes back, will you still marry her?" Carter opened his mouth, intending to say no, but the words choked in his throat. He couldn't answer immediately. The next morning, Luke and Tommy stopped by the Davis house. He handed her a piece of paper with an address written on it. "A small house near the east gate is currently vacant. The landlord wants to rent it out." Claire was overjoyed. "Thank you, Commander Luke." "You'll have to negotiate the price yourself," Luke said calmly. "I was just on my way and dropped off the address." Claire smiled. "If I manage to rent it, I'll treat you to a meal." Luke nodded. "Let's wait until you actually rent it." From the end of the hallway, Carter and Vivian were walking over. Seeing the scene, Vivian said pointedly, "Commander Luke really cares about Claire, doesn't he?" Carter's face darkened. "It's just normal assistance." But his hands had already clenched into fists at some point. That afternoon, Claire borrowed the yard in front of the house to take measurements for the 6 performance customers. She hung up a curtain to create a private corner and carefully measured each person. She made slight adjustments to the details of each dress design to flatter every individual's figure. "Claire, you're so skilled. Whoever marries you will be truly blessed," one customer praised. Joyful laughter echoed around them. Claire confidently explained each design, her demeanor absolutely radiant. Carter stood observing from a distance. In the past, she had always shrunk back, hiding behind him, too timid to even speak loudly. Now, she stood in the center of the crowd, shining all on her own. That change wasn't because of him, and she no longer belonged to him, either. Carter felt an immense sense of loss invade his chest. Late that night, as the lights of the housing compound turned on, Carter stepped out of his house and headed toward Claire's apartment. The Davis family's door was slightly ajar. Claire and her brother were sitting inside, counting the deposit money and calculating the cost of buying fabric. Carter stood outside the door. He recalled the countless times in the past when Claire had stood waiting for him outside his office. He used to make her wait for hours. Now, he was the one waiting outside her door. Michael stepped out to get some water. Seeing him, he asked, "Professor Carter, is there something you need?" "I want to see Claire." Michael went inside to ask, then stepped back out and replied, "Claire says she's busy." Carter stood stranded in the middle of the hallway. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No one inside invited him in. There was no hot cup of tea, no welcoming smile. When Claire brought out a bucket of water to wash her hands and saw him still standing there, she furrowed her brow. "You haven't gone home yet?" "Claire, I can ask someone to contact a good doctor for your brother," Carter said hurriedly. "I will take care of it myself," she replied. "Why must you insist on rejecting me?" he asked bitterly. Claire looked him straight in the eyes, enunciating every word clearly. "Because I don't want to place my hope in you ever again." She turned and went into the house. The wooden door shut tightly. Vivian had returned. She was the person Carter had thought he was waiting for all these years. But that night, he stood outside Claire's door. The person who used to wait for him was no longer turning back. For the first time, Carter felt as if his heart had lost something. In the past, Claire had stood waiting for him time and time again, but he had never once turned his head. Today, the person waiting had switched to him, but that door would never open for him again. The next morning, Claire and Michael went to the small house near the east gate of the compound. The front room faced the street. The whitewashed brick walls were peeling, and the tiled roof in the back had a few leaks. The old wooden doorframe creaked noisily. "Mrs. Lawson frowned at the siblings. 6 months' rent paid up front. No discounts." Claire opened her notebook, calculating the deposit money she had just received from the group order. "I will pay 3 months up front. We will clean it ourselves and fix the roof and door without damaging the structure of the house." Mrs. Lawson hesitated. "You're so young. Where are you going to get the money to pay regularly?" Claire took out her order book, showing her the customers' signatures and the deposit amounts. "I run a tailoring business. The orders I've already received are enough to cover the rent." Michael, standing next to her, added, "And I am a mechanic at the factory." "I will reinforce all the doors and windows myself," Michael added. "Mrs. Lawson looked over the order book carefully and nodded. "All right, a 3-month trial lease." Claire immediately took a pen and paper, clearly writing out 2 copies of the contract. The 3-month lease term and the responsibility for minor repairs were specifically detailed. Mrs. Lawson signed her name, collected the money, and handed over the keys. Claire pushed open the door to the front room. A thin patch of whitewash fell from the wall, kicking up a cloud of dust. Michael looked at the empty house and frowned. "The customers are coming to try on those 6 dresses in 3 days. Are you sure you'll have the shop ready by then?" "I will," Claire stated decisively. The siblings got to work cleaning. Michael sawed wood to make a clothing rack, fixed the door hinges, and built a cutting table. Claire cleared out the trash, scrubbed the front room, and hung up a curtain to create a private fitting corner. Mrs. Miller, along with 2 other women from the compound, Brenda and Susan, also came over to help whitewash the walls. Claire recorded everyone's labor in her notebook and paid them in full, refusing to accept free help. She gave Brenda and Susan some fabric scraps to test their skills. Brenda, who was 30, sewed very sturdy seams but worked slowly. Susan, who was 20, pedaled the machine very fast, but her stitching was sloppy. Claire assigned Brenda to assemble the bodices and check the details, while Susan was put in charge of sewing the straight seams and overlocking. She laid down the rules of the shop: no taking leftover fabric without permission, no hiding mistakes, and ruined seams had to be ripped out and redone by the person who made them. Susan tried to secretly fold over a crooked seam on the shoulder of a sample piece, but Claire immediately caught her hand. "If it's wrong, rip it out and sew it again. If you hide mistakes, you won't last here," Claire told her. Susan lowered her head and had no choice but to rip out the stitches and start over from scratch. Michael hung a small wooden sign above the door. On it, neat lettering read, Claire's Tailoring and Alterations. That afternoon, Claire brought her receipt to the state-run fabric store to pick up the materials for the order of 6 dresses. The clerk, Nancy, hesitated, not daring to look up. The head of the clothing department, Mrs. Walsh, stepped out and said in a cold voice, "The dark red fabric is out of stock. It's been transferred to another unit." "I paid a deposit and was scheduled to pick it up today," Claire said, placing her receipt on the counter. "The store prioritizes units with official letters of introduction." "You're running an unauthorized business. You have no right to reserve goods," Mrs. Walsh sneered. Claire immediately understood. The other party was deliberately bullying her. The state-run store was afraid her little shop would steal all their customers. "Then, sign here to confirm that the store cannot deliver the fabric on time," Claire said, pushing the receipt forward. Mrs. Walsh didn't take out a pen. She simply jutted her chin toward the corner of the warehouse. "There are a few leftover rolls with color flaws over there. Buy them if you want, or leave it." Those were a few frayed remnant rolls of dark blue, light blue, and ivory fabric. Mrs. Walsh thought Claire would have to give up because it would be impossible to sew 6 identical dresses from scraps. Claire inspected the material. The fabric was of good quality, only the colors were mismatched. An idea flashed in her mind. She paid for all the remnant rolls and carried them back to the shop. Rumors spread very quickly. By early evening, Miss Harper and 2 of the customers from the group of 6 stormed into the shop. "Claire, I heard you couldn't buy the red fabric," one customer said harshly. "Give me my deposit back." Susan panicked, and Brenda stood frozen in confusion. Claire didn't make excuses. She stacked all the deposit money on the table. "Here is the deposit. Whoever wants to withdraw, I will refund it immediately." The room suddenly fell silent. Claire spread out her sketching paper on the table. "But I have a new plan. 6 dresses of the same design, but color blocked with dark blue, light blue, and ivory." She explained each sketch. "For a fuller figure, we'll use dark colors on the sides. For a petite figure, we'll use lighter colors on the bodice. When standing together as a team, it will still look uniform, but when worn individually, it will flatter each person's shape." Miss Harper looked at the sketches, her eyes lighting up. "All right, I'll give you 1 day to make a sample. If it looks good, we'll proceed," she decided. That night, a light rain fell outside. Black smoke puffed out from the electrical outlet in the front room, and the sewing machine jolted to a halt. "The power shorted out!" Michael hurriedly flipped the breaker. The old electrical system couldn't handle the load. "We have to deliver the sample tomorrow. What do we do now?" Susan panicked. Claire divided the tasks decisively. "Take the fabric to Brenda's house to sew the machine parts. The hand-sewn button parts will be done here at the shop under the oil lamp." Commander Luke, who was walking past on his way back from duty, saw the pitch-black shop and stepped inside. He inspected the charred electrical outlet and stopped Michael from trying to wire it himself. "Don't just temporarily splice it. It's too easy to start a fire." Luke turned and called the soldier in charge of electricity for the military district to come over and help. While waiting for the electricity to be fixed, he saw Claire sitting by the dim oil lamp, sewing by hand. The tips of her fingers had been pricked by the needle and were oozing blood. Luke took a small bottle of antiseptic from his pocket and placed it on the table. "In business, you need to keep your word," he said, looking at her, "but you also need to preserve your health. Don't stay up all night." Once the electricity was fixed, Claire divided the shift so everyone could get some shut-eye. By the crack of dawn, the first color block dress was finished. Early that morning, Miss Harper brought the entire group over to try on the clothes. Mrs. Walsh also stood at the door with her arms crossed, waiting for a good show. But when the first customer stepped out from behind the curtain, the whole room gasped in awe. The dark blue dress, color-blocked with ivory at the collar and waist, made the wearer's figure look graceful and her movements incredibly light. "It's beautiful, Miss Harper exclaimed. "It's far more beautiful than the original single-color design." Mrs. Walsh's face darkened. "Patching together a few scraps of fabric is called design?" Claire looked at her and calmly replied, "The fabric might be leftovers, but placed in the right spot, it still holds value." Nancy, who had come along with her, hurriedly stepped forward and let the truth slip. "Mrs. Walsh, that red fabric Claire ordered the other day is still sitting right there in the warehouse." Everyone around looked at Mrs. Walsh with contempt. Ashamed and furious, Mrs. Walsh turned and stormed off. Miss Harper held Claire's hand. "From now on, my unit will buy the fabric ourselves and bring it to you to sew." The crisis was resolved. However, before everyone could even celebrate, Michael, who was standing next to the cutting table, suddenly swayed. The ledger in his hand fell to the ground. "Michael!" Claire lunged forward to catch her brother. Michael clutched his chest, his face pale and his breathing labored. Luke, who had just arrived at the East Gate, immediately called for a car to take Michael to the military clinic. After the examination, the doctor sternly warned Claire. His heart condition has worsened significantly. He absolutely cannot do any heavy lifting. He needs to go to a major hospital for surgery as soon as possible. Claire looked at her brother lying on the hospital bed, her heart aching as if it were being sliced. She paid a portion of the medical bills, depleting a chunk of her hard-earned savings. Luke stood in the hallway. When she walked out, he asked, "How much are you short?" "I'll figure it out myself," Claire said, biting her lip. Luke looked at her, his voice deepening. "If you know your goal, don't exhaust yourself before you get there." 3 days later, Claire's tailoring shop officially went into stable operation. The 6 performance dresses were completed perfectly, and Miss Harper paid the remaining balance in full. Customers bustled in and out of the shop. Brenda and Susan worked proficiently. Michael sat at the inner table, in charge of light, easy bookkeeping. Luke walked by, bringing several wooden hangers that had been officially liquidated from the military warehouse. Claire accepted them and paid in full according to the invoice. Carter and Vivian were taking a stroll past the East Gate. He stopped in his tracks, looking at the Claire's sign hanging high in the sunlight. Claire was smiling, taking a customer's measurements with a confident demeanor, completely ignoring his existence. Carter felt an emptiness in his chest. She had carved out her own path, and on that path, he didn't exist at all. Late in the afternoon, a military jeep stopped in front of the shop. A dignified, middle-aged woman stepped out, introducing herself as Diana, the head of the military arts troupe. She looked at the row of color-block dresses hanging in the shop, then placed a formally stamped proposal on the table. "We need to order costumes for the Provincial Arts Festival." Susan peeked in curiously, and Brenda held her breath. Claire opened the order form. The quantity was 30 performance outfits. The deadline was 20 days. The labor cost was enough to send Michael straight to a major hospital for surgery. But the shop currently only had 2 sewing machines and 2 seamstresses. Carter, standing nearby, heard this and hurried over. "Claire, you can't handle an order this big. I can ask someone to help you get a loan." Claire didn't look at him. She looked up at Diana. "I will come watch the troops rehearsal tomorrow. After that, I'll give you my answer on whether I'll take it or not." Luke stood, leaning against the jeep, looking at her with a trusting gaze. 30 costumes, 20 days, 2 sewing machines, and a sum of money enough to bring her brother closer to his surgery than ever before. Claire gripped the order form tightly. Her biggest opportunity had arrived, but one wrong step and her newly opened tailoring shop would lose everything. 30 costumes in 20 days. Claire spread the stamped requirement form from the arts troupe on the table. The requirements included 24 female and 6 male outfits, uniform, easy to move in, and striking on stage. The shop currently only had 2 old sewing machines. Brenda was worried. "Even if we work non-stop, I'm afraid we won't finish in time." Susan, however, was excited. "The pay is so high, just take it." Claire shook her head, calculating. She absolutely couldn't accept it blindly. She had to do a practical survey first. She mapped out a clear schedule: sample approval in 3 days, mass cutting, sewing, fitting, and final inspection. The next morning, Diana sent a car to take her to the rehearsal hall. She informed Claire that Luke had handled the paperwork for her to enter and exit the training area, but he hadn't interfered with the troupe's decision. Inside the rehearsal hall, the performers were spinning continuously to the rhythm of the dance. One girl tripped on the hem of her long skirt and fell hard to the floor. Claire walked over to check her injuries, then turned to examine the old costume. The fabric was too thick, the waist was tight, and the wide flared skirt hindered movement. She opened her notebook, writing down every comment from the performers. Luke stood in the corner of the room in his neat military uniform. He calmly introduced her to everyone. "This is the tailoring shop manager invited to review the prototypes." He maintained an appropriate distance, never using his position to create privileges for her. Claire proposed a solution: a fitted bodice, lightweight, multi-layered fabric, built-in safety shorts, and hidden slits to make spinning easier. Diana nodded in approval. "Bring the sample over in 2 days. If it passes, the order is yours." As they walked out the gate, Luke, walking beside her, suddenly asked, "Have you eaten breakfast yet?" Claire paused, honestly shaking her head. Luke handed her a package of military standard biscuits. "If you don't eat, you won't have the strength to make the sample." Claire was about to take out money to pay him, but he quickly added, "Consider it an exchange so you don't pass out in the training area." Claire smiled gently. "Thank you, Commander Luke." By that afternoon, the news had spread throughout the compound. As soon as Mrs. Miller saw Claire return, she teased, "Did the commander personally give you food?" Susan's eyes lit up. "Claire, is it true?" Claire put the biscuits in the cabinet and replied calmly, It was just an extra ration from the unit. Don't spread silly rumors. Mrs. Miller laughed loud. You might not have thought about it, but the commander definitely has. Claire lowered her head to draw the design, the tips of her ears turning slightly red. That evening, Carter walked into the shop after the two seamstresses had left. He looked at the package of biscuits on the table and gritted out, "Does Luke really like you? What does it matter to you?" She retorted. "The whole compound is talking about it." Carter frowned. "He works far from home and his job is dangerous. He's not right for you. And you are?" She looked up, staring him straight in the face. "I can change." Carter blurted out a sentence he had never thought of saying before. "Do you want to change because you understand you were wrong, or because there is someone else standing beside me?" Carter stiffened, utterly unable to answer. Michael stepped out from the back of the house and coldly asked him to leave. The next morning, Vivian was standing and chatting with a few women in front of the store, state-run store. She sighed gently. Claire just opened her shop and already received an order from the military district. I hope people don't think she relied on her connections with Commander Luke. Mrs. Walsh, standing nearby, heard this and her eyes lit up. She immediately embellished the story and reported to the regional management board that Claire's shop was receiving supplies and orders against regulations. By early afternoon, representatives from the management board walked into the shop. Someone reported that your shop is committing fraud and using connections to secure orders, they stated. People from the compound crowded around the door. Vivian and Carter also stood in the crowd. Susan was terrified, and Brenda turned pale, but Claire maintained a calm demeanor. She opened the cabinet, took out stacks of ledgers, and placed them on the table. A lease agreement with a witness, a receipt for the old sewing machines, an invoice for the liquidated hangers, a ledger tracking income, expenses, and deposits, and finally, the request for a sample prototype with the official red stamp of the arts troupe. There is absolutely no personal signature from Commander Luke on here. Everything is transparent. I am not afraid of an inspection, Claire said. She turned to look at Vivian. Vivian, if you are worried about me, you should ask me directly. You don't need to go spreading rumors all over the compound. Vivian grew flustered, her face turning pale at being called out by name. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed outside the door. Luke walked in alongside Diana. Diana spoke decisively to the crowd. I was the one who saw Claire's color-blocked dress sample, thought it was beautiful, and reached out to her on my own initiative. No individual intervened. The inspector looked over all the paperwork and nodded, confirming that the shop had no violations. Mrs. Walsh, bitter and trying to save face, said, even if there was no preferential treatment, Commander Luke has helped her too much. If they don't have a special relationship, who would have that much free time? Everyone held their breath, looking at Luke. Carter stepped forward, speaking in a cold voice. Commander Luke, if you had kept your distance, there wouldn't be any rumors. Luke turned around, his gaze as sharp as a dagger, piercing straight into Carter. Abandoning someone when they are in danger, staying silent when they are framed, it is the slanderers who ruin her reputation, not the ones who help her. So whose side are you really on? Mrs. Walsh shrieked. Luke looked over at Claire, his eyes falling on her fingers covered in needle pricks. His gaze softened, but his voice was full of authority. I stand on the side of the truth. He looked directly at Carter and the people around them, declaring decisively, I help her because I want to. She has never taken advantage of me. And at the very least, I have never made her beg. Carter took a step back, all the color draining from his face. The times Claire had desperately pleaded with him to introduce a doctor or borrow a book, he had coldly ignored her. Luke turned to the shop inspector. If there is a fault, issue a fine. But if anyone uses rumors to smear another person's reputation, I will demand an investigation to the very end. The crowd was dead silent. No one dared to utter another word. After everyone dispersed, the shop returned to silence. Claire held Luke back, asking hesitantly, What did you mean by what you just said in front of everyone? Luke stopped and turned to look at her. At first, it was because you were in trouble. After that, it was because I saw that you deserved to be treated well by others. Claire clutched the hem of her shirt, lowering her voice. Right now, I only want to make money to pay for my brother's medical treatment. I haven't thought about romance. Luke didn't show any disappointment. He calmly stepped closer to the sewing table. I know, helping you isn't to exchange it for an answer. He looked straight into her eyes, every word warm and resolute. If you don't want to think about it yet, you don't need to. I can wait. Outside the shop, Carter stood rooted to the spot in the shade. Vivian sighed softly. Carter, she is about to have a better option. Impossible, Carter blurted out, but his voice was trembling, completely devoid of confidence. Inside the shop, Claire lowered her head and picked up her scissors to continue cutting fabric. Claire had spent 15 years waiting for a man who didn't love her, so in this life, She didn't want to wait for anyone, nor did she want anyone waiting for her. But Luke simply looked at her and said calmly, "If you don't want to think about it yet, you don't need to." The female costume sample featured a lightweight layered skirt and built-in safety shorts. The male sample was tailored and flattering. The performers executed a series of continuous spinning dance moves, and the costumes did not hinder their legs at all. Diana nodded in satisfaction. Claire noted down 3 minor details that needed adjustment. The contract for the 30 costumes was immediately signed, and the first deposit was handed directly into Claire's hands. Luke stood beside her, looking at her bandaged fingertips. "Do your hands still hurt?" "It's nothing, just a minor cut," Claire smiled. Tommy, standing behind them, chuckled softly. Carter walked to the door of the rehearsal room. His gaze halted at Claire's left wrist. There, a long, faded scar was visible. Carter followed Claire out into the hallway. He stared at the scar on her arm. "Since when do you have this scar?" Claire pulled her sleeve down to cover it. "It's been a long time, I don't remember." "Was it from the rainstorm 15 years ago?" Carter pressed. Claire stopped walking, exhaustion flickering in her eyes. "Why are you asking about that now? It's in the past and not worth mentioning." Carter reached out, intending to grab her wrist. Claire immediately stepped back to avoid him. Luke approached, helping her carry the large sample box. "Are you finished? I'll take you back to the shop." "I'm finished," Claire nodded. Carter stood rooted to the spot, watching the two of them walk away side by side. A fierce sense of unease surged in his chest. Carter returned home. He opened a wooden box carefully hidden at the bottom of his cabinet. Inside was a red scarf embroidered with the letter V. Vivian walked into the room. Seeing him holding the scarf, she smiled. "Are you reminiscing about the old days again? How did you save me at the canal that year?" Carter asked abruptly. Vivian hesitated for a beat. "The rain was really heavy. I pulled you onto the bank." "Which hand did you use to pull me? Which of your wrists was injured?" "I don't remember clearly. The injury was minor, so it didn't leave a scar." "Then what about this 7-knot tying style on the scarf?" Carter interrogated. Vivian started to panic. "What's wrong with— Why are you bombarding me with questions?" Mrs. Hayes happened to walk past the door and casually chimed in, "Vivian lent that scarf to Claire that day. When little Claire ran off to buy medicine, I saw her wearing it." Vivian's face instantly went deathly pale. Carter ran straight to the house of Nurse Jenkins, the old nurse who used to be on duty at the clinic. Nurse Jenkins flipped through the medical record book from 15 years ago. The ink was faded, but the recorded names were very clear. Carter Hayes, choked on water. Claire Davis, deep cut on left wrist, high fever due to cold exposure. Vivian's name was nowhere to be found. Nurse Jenkins sighed. "That little girl ran to get help, her hand covered in blood. She kept screaming to save you first." Carter trembled as he held the paper, his mind entirely blank. He went to find Michael. Michael looked at him with cold eyes. "She had a fever for 3 days straight and her wrist had to get several stitches." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Carter choked out. Michael retorted decisively. "She didn't want you to force yourself to treat her well out of gratitude." Looking at the crumbling Carter, Michael continued. "Claire once said, 'If he likes me, he will still like me even without knowing about this. If he doesn't like me, saying it out loud will only buy me a debt of gratitude.'" Carter stood outside the tailoring shop. Through the glass window, he watched Claire diligently cutting fabric under the lamp. For 15 years, he had forced her to cut her hair in Vivian's style. He had criticized her for not being gentle enough, taking her care for granted. It turned out that the person he had treated as a mere stand-in was the very one who had given him his life. But even without the life-saving grace, she had already loved him with all her genuine heart. "So what if you know the truth now?" Michael had told him coldly. "You no longer have the right to bother her." Carter couldn't utter a single word in his defense. The sky opened up, pouring heavy rain. Carter stormed into Vivian's house and threw the red scarf onto the table. Knowing she could no longer hide it, Vivian burst into tears. "When you woke up, you grabbed my hand and asked me yourself. I only stayed silent that one time because I liked you so much." "Your silence lasted for 15 years, Carter roared. Vivian looked at him bitterly. "Me, lying was wrong, but what about you? Before, you loved me because you thought I saved you. Now that you know she saved you, you're just switching to loving her?" Carter froze. Her words were like a bucket of cold water thrown right in his face. He clenched his fists, his voice turning hoarse. "I don't regret it just because she saved me. I regret it because I never truly saw her." He rushed out of Vivian's house into the torrential rain. The door to the tailoring shop burst open. Soaking wet, Carter walked in and placed the red scarf on the table. "Claire, the person who saved me back then, it was you." Claire stopped her scissors and calmly replied, "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything?" "I saved you because I couldn't watch someone die, not to make you love me." Carter stepped forward, his voice pleading. Give me a chance to make it up to you. I can take your brother to the best hospital. I will. I don't need you to use your money and connections to buy back the past, Claire interrupted. I love you, Claire. I truly love you, Carter cried out. Claire looked at him, her eyes without a ripple of emotion. If the person who saved you had actually been Vivian, would you be saying this to me today? Carter fell silent. You don't love me. You're just trying to atone for your guilt. The sound of a jeep pulling up echoed outside the door. Holding an umbrella, Luke walked into the shop. He brought with him the approved list of measurements. Seeing how agitated Carter was, Luke stood protectively in front of Claire. She asked you to leave, Luke said. Carter's eyes were bloodshot. Did you know she once saved my life? Luke looked at him, his gaze resolute. Who she saved doesn't dictate who she has to marry. She said no. You should listen. Carter choked on his words. He couldn't muster a single sentence in rebuttal. Michael stepped out and ordered him to leave. Carter stumbled out of the shop, but he didn't go home. He stood frozen in the rain, staring at the warm lights inside the shop. The rain grew heavier. Vivian ran over with an umbrella, wanting to pull Carter home. Carter, let's go home. She already has Luke. Carter shook off her hand, his eyes glued to the shop's door. That is the consequence I have to bear. Then what about us? Vivian sobbed. What I thought was the love between us was built on a lie from the very beginning. Carter turned his back on her. Looking at his heartless attitude, Vivian's heart filled with resentment. Inside the shop, Luke poured a glass of warm water and placed it next to Claire. He didn't urge her to forgive, nor did he pry into the past. He simply stayed by her side in silence, keeping her company as she worked. It was late into the night. Claire opened the shop door to grab another stack of fabric from the vehicle outside. Carter, who had been standing out in the rain, rushed forward. He dropped to his knees on the soaking wet ground, right in front of the witnesses from the compound. Claire, I was wrong. I'm begging you. Claire took a step back, her eyes cold. You kneeling is your choice, not my responsibility. I saved your life, and you repaid me by making me see clearly that I loved the wrong person. We no longer owe each other anything. Carter looked up, his tears mixing with the rain. But I love you. Claire looked at him decisively. You say you love me, but I don't love you anymore. Luke tilted his large umbrella, completely shielding Claire from the rain, not letting a single drop splash onto her. Claire turned around and walked into the house. 15 years ago, Claire had thrown herself into the rushing water to save him. 15 years later, Carter knelt in the pouring rain, begging her to turn back. But the person who had once loved him selflessly was no longer there. She only left him with one sentence. You say you love me, but I don't love you anymore. The next morning, the rain on the tiled roof had completely stopped. Claire arrived at the tailoring shop before the sky was fully light. She checked each roll of fabric and the progress of the 30 performance costumes. 6 outfits had their bodices completed, 8 had just been cut, and the rest were carefully marked. The delivery deadline was exactly 13 days away. Brenda looked at her face and asked apologetically, Did what happened last night exhaust you? It's fine. Our work cannot stop, Claire replied. Michael walked out to the front room, his face a bit pale. He picked up the ledgers, intending to check them. Sit down and rest. Today you're only working half a day, she said, holding his hand back. Luke walked into the shop. He brought a piece of paper adjusting the costume fitting schedule. The arts troupe had agreed to split the fittings into 2 batches to reduce the pressure on the shop. He placed the paper on the table and looked at Claire. Are you all right? I'm fine, she answered briefly. Luke looked at her for a few seconds before speaking in a warm, deep voice. If you're not fine, you don't need to force yourself to act like you are. Claire paused for a beat. She lowered her head and gathered her measuring tape. The shop still has a lot of work to do. He didn't force her to continue. He turned and walked out the door. Tommy stood out on the street, chuckling softly. Commander, you caused quite a stir in the whole compound last night. Don't speak nonsense in front of her, Luke reprimanded with a single sentence, then walked away. By late afternoon, Susan secretly folded a scrap of the sleeve design sketch and stuffed it into her bag. She only wanted to take it home to practice cutting on her own. Outside the shop, a silhouette had quietly observed this action. On her way home, Susan was stopped by a young woman named Emily, who struck up a conversation. Emily effusively praised the clothing designs of Claire's shop. She expressed her desire to order an outfit for her younger sister. Flattered, Susan excitedly explained, This design has a very special sleeve, and the slit is hidden inside. Emily glanced at Susan's bag and smiled. Can I take a quick look at the paper in your bag? Susan timidly refused. Emily immediately pulled out an expensive plastic hair clip and handed it to Susan. I'm just going to take a quick glance. I won't take it from you. Susan accepted the clip and took out the piece of paper. Emily, quick with her hands, used a piece of carbon paper hidden under her thigh to trace all the main lines. After Susan left, Vivian stepped out from the back room of the tea stall. Emily handed the copy to her to receive her payment. Vivian took the drawing and went to meet Mrs. Walsh at the state-run store. Mrs. Walsh's eyes lit up. Excellent! This time, we have to teach her a lesson. Vivian lowered her voice and instructed. Just sew an outfit that looks similar enough to create a dispute. She looked at Mrs. Walsh and asked unexpectedly, "Do you know anyone who has a grudge against Claire?" "There is that Marcus guy at the coal yard," Mrs. Walsh replied immediately. Vivian fell silent. A ruthless plan began to form in her mind. 2 days later, the state-run store hung a new dress right in front of their door. Underneath it was a sign that read, "New design by Mrs. Walsh's tailoring team." A regular customer rushed into Claire's shop to deliver the news. Claire and Brenda walked over to the state-run store. The dress hanging there featured the shortened sleeves and hidden slit exactly like her design. However, the cut was quite clumsy. Mrs. Walsh walked out with her arms crossed, her voice booming defensively. The surrounding shoppers began to whisper in suspicion. Claire didn't lose her temper. She looked at Mrs. Walsh. "On what date did you complete this design?" Mrs. Walsh pulled out her notebook. "The 15th of this month." Claire opened the file folder she had brought with her. Her pages clearly documented each day of adjustments, bearing Diana's signature and the Arts Troupe's official red stamp dated the 12th. Diana, having received the news, also arrived immediately. She confirmed with a stern face, "I approved this sketch last week." Vivian, standing in the crowd, immediately stepped forward to play peacemaker. "Perhaps it's just a coincidence of ideas. Someone as skilled as Claire probably wouldn't need to copy." Her words sounded like a defense, but they only made others more suspicious. Carter stood in the back, observing the entire scene. He recalled seeing Vivian holding a piece of blue carbon paper 2 days ago. Suspicion began to flare up in his heart. Claire looked at Vivian and asked directly, "Since when did you know about this design?" Vivian started, "I just saw it today." "Money can be earned back," Claire said, turning to Mrs. Walsh. "But the reputation of my shop is not something anyone can just slander as they please." She demanded that both samples be sealed for the management board to verify. In the middle of that night, a silhouette stealthily approached Claire's shop. He used an iron bar to pry open the wooden door and slipped inside. Early the next morning, Mrs. Lawson cried out in alarm when she saw the tailoring shop had been vandalized. Claire and her brother rushed over. The front room was completely ransacked. The large mirror was smashed to pieces. 2 main rolls of fabric were slashed to ribbons. 6 bodices currently being sewn were now drenched in pitch-black machine oil. The cash box had been pried open, but only a few loose coins were missing. Susan panicked and reached down to pick up a piece of paper. "Don't touch it!" Claire shouted, stopping her. Michael looked at the ruined fabric, swaying as he clutched his chest. Claire hurriedly helped him sit down on a chair and gave him his medicine. Out of the 30 costumes, 6 were heavily damaged, 4 could be washed clean, and the rest were luckily unharmed. Vivian walked past the door and deliberately exclaimed, "How could it be such a coincidence, happening right during a design dispute?" The onlookers began to suspect that Claire had staged the scene to buy herself an extension on the deadline. A military jeep pulled up to the door, and Luke stepped out. He scanned the scene and turned to ask Claire, "Has anyone touched the items inside?" "No one yet." Luke nodded. "Good job." Luke coordinated with the local security officers to file a report. He carefully examined the ground, then asked in a loud voice, "Who wore size 42 old work boots last night?" A man watching from the outside flinched. Luke continued, pointing out the anomalies. The vandal knew exactly where the fabric and sketches were kept, but didn't know the real deposit money was hidden elsewhere. A scrap of gray fabric from the state-run store was deliberately left behind, far too obviously. Tommy shined a flashlight in the corner by the door. "There are mud tracks mixed with coal dust here. Around here, only the West Coal Yard has this kind of dirt." Luke picked up a threatening note left behind. "The paper has a faint scent of jasmine." Carter, standing nearby, immediately recognized it as the expensive stationery Vivian always used. "The more evidence points in a specific direction, the more careful we must be of planted traps," Luke stated. Just then, Susan suddenly fell to her knees in front of Claire. She sobbed bitterly. "Claire, it's my fault." "I leaked the design." Brenda glared angrily at Susan. Susan pulled the plastic hair clip out of her pocket, crying as she recounted her encounter with Emily at the tea stall. She recalled, "When I was leaving, I saw Vivian standing at the end of the alley." Luke confiscated the hair clip as evidence. He looked at Susan, his voice stern. "Where is Emily right now?" She usually hangs around the train station market, Susan answered. Claire looked at Susan and spoke decisively. You were wrong to violate the shop's rules, but you told the truth. I will temporarily suspend you from work pending the results. Tommy rushed in from outside with news. We caught Marcus at the coal yard. At the security office, Marcus was handcuffed to a chair. The hems of his pants were covered in machine oil, and his boot treads perfectly matched the mud tracks at Claire's shop. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Marcus confessed that Emily was the one who hired him to vandalize the shop. Emily was immediately brought in for a confrontation. Terrified, she confessed that the people who gave her the money were Mrs. Walsh and a young teacher. Mrs. Walsh was called in. She turned pale and admitted to buying the sketch design, but vehemently denied having anything to do with the vandalism. I just wanted to win back my customers. Destroying the shop was all Vivian's idea. Marcus added to his confession. The person who hired me handed over the money in a cream-colored envelope smelling of jasmine. The corner of the letter had the letter V written on it. Carter stood in the corner of the room, his entire body trembling. He recalled the night before, when Vivian had dropped a cream-colored envelope at his house. He pulled that very envelope out of his pocket and placed it on the officer's desk. This is evidence. Luke looked at Carter without a single word of thanks. He opened the envelope. Inside was a piece of paper detailing Claire's shop's closing hours, along with a handwritten note. After tonight, Claire's shop will no longer be able to deliver the goods. That delicate handwriting belonged unmistakably to Viv. The public confrontation took place right in the central courtyard of the military compound. Residents gathered in droves. Vivian was called out in front of the crowd. She still tried to maintain her innocent facade. That paper isn't mine. Someone is trying to frame me. The security officers presented the evidence one by one. Vivian's matching plastic hair clip, the carbon paper stained with blue ink, the testimonies from Emily and Marcus, and finally, the envelope handed over by Carter. Vivian completely collapsed. She looked at Carter with eyes full of hatred, then turned and screamed at Claire, "Why is everyone on your side? If it weren't for you, Carter would already be mine." Claire stood tall, her back straight, calmly replying, "I have always been here. It's just that before, you were used to people not seeing me." Vivian was struck speechless. Carter took a step forward, looking coldly at Vivian. "I handed over the envelope not for Claire, but because I wanted to restore the truth." Vivian cried miserably, but she was still led away by the security officers. Before the eyes of the entire compound, her image as a gentle, innocent first love officially vanished into thin air. The security officers decisively announced the results. Claire's shop was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. The state-run store was forced to take down the copied design and pay for the damages. Mrs. Walsh was temporarily suspended, pending a formal investigation. Diana stepped forward and announced that the arts troupe would grant Claire's shop a 2-day extension to finish the order. The entire compound erupted in cheers and applause. Susan bowed her head, apologizing to Claire. Claire issued her penalty, a deduction of her bonus and a 1-month probation, but her base labor wages would still be paid in full. Michael smiled in relief. Suddenly, a woman standing on the outskirts of the crowd curled her lip and muttered, "Either way, it's all thanks to Commander Luke having her back that the investigation went so fast." Luke heard this. He didn't avoid it at all. He stepped closer, standing right next to Claire. Under the gazes of all the compound residents, Luke held out his solid hand. Claire looked at his hand. He had never forced her. He had always protected her with absolute respect. Slowly, Claire reached out and placed her hand in his. Luke clasped her hand, his grip just right, warm and unwavering. Standing far away, Carter felt his heart ache, as if it were being torn apart. He finally understood that he had lost her forever. Luke looked straight into the crowd, his voice firm and resonant. "The investigation is the responsibility of the police and the military district. She didn't rely on anyone." He held his head high, decisively declaring, "I am courting Claire. She hasn't accepted my feelings yet, and I will continue to respect her choice." The woman who had just mocked them stammered, "Then, she is still your person, isn't she?" Luke gently squeezed Claire's hand, his authoritative voice echoing through the space. "That's right. No one is allowed to touch my person." Claire looked up at the man beside her. Luke leaned close to her ear, whispering so only the two of them could hear, "You don't need to answer right away." Claire didn't pull her hand back. She smiled and gently squeezed his hand in return. The whole compound used to say Claire relied on Luke. But that day, everyone saw that the shop was built by her, the designs were created by her, and her reputation was upheld by her alone. Luke only did one thing. He took her hand in front of the entire compound and said, "No one is allowed to touch my person." The final 12 days. The door to Claire's tailoring shop was rebuilt more sturdily. Claire recalculated the entire schedule. Out of the 30 costumes, the 6 heavily damaged ones had new fabric cut, and the 4 stained with machine oil had been successfully treated. She set up a clear assembly line. Brenda was in charge of checking the quality of the seams, Susan handled the secondary tasks to make up for her mistake, and Michael sat at the inner table, keeping track of the inventory and quantities. Luke brought over the confirmation paper for the fitting schedule. The arts troupe agreed to divide into small groups to come to the shop for fittings, avoiding the need to transport the costumes multiple times. He looked at Claire and asked softly, "How is your brother's health?" "I've almost saved up enough money for the surgery," Claire replied. Luke nodded. "If you are short on any paperwork, let me know." When he left, Susan leaned in and asked quietly, "Claire, have you accepted the commander's feelings yet?" "No." Brenda, standing nearby, smiled. "Not pulling your hand back is already an answer." That night, while Michael was reviewing the ledgers, he suddenly clutched his chest. He collapsed onto the table, his face deathly pale. Claire rushed over to support him, shouting loudly for help. Luke, who was on duty nearby, immediately dispatched a military vehicle to take Michael to the clinic. The doctor performed an emergency examination, his expression grave. He needs to be transferred to a major hospital and undergo surgery within the next 3 days. Claire stood at the boundary of her brother's life and death. If she left right now, the 30 costume order risked being delayed. Brenda grasped her hand firmly. "You go take him. We have everything covered at the shop." Claire immediately wrote in her notebook, meticulously detailing every instruction, and handed everything over to Brenda. Luke looked at her and said decisively, "Go with your brother. The shop is taken care of." Claire nodded. She chose to trust her team. The major hospital was packed with people. A nurse handed her the invoice for the surgery and intensive care costs. The final number was quite a bit higher than expected. Claire opened her bag. Even with all the money from selling dresses, the deposits, and the compensation put together, she was still a little short. Luke, standing beside her, asked directly, "How much are you short?" Claire stated the exact amount, then took a pen and paper to write him an IOU. "Let me borrow this amount. I will pay it back in full within 3 months." Luke accepted the paper, carefully folded it, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I will keep this. Once you pay off the money, I will return the paper." Carter appeared in the hospital corridor. He brought a letter of recommendation from a top specialist in the field. He didn't bring up their romantic history. He simply handed the paper to her. "This doctor is exceptionally good. Take the medical records to see him. You don't owe me anything." Claire accepted it and bowed her head. "Thank you." Carter looked at the IOU in Luke's pocket. He understood that she had finally accepted relying on someone else, but in the most fair and equitable way possible. The operating room light flicked on, and the heavy iron doors clanged shut. Claire sat on the wooden bench in the hallway, her hands icy cold. She was terrified that the nightmare of her past life would repeat itself. Luke sat down beside her. "What if it's still not in time?" Claire asked, trembling. Luke didn't offer empty promises. He looked at her, his voice deep and steady. "Then I will still be here." Claire gripped his sleeve tightly. Carter stood in the corner of the corridor, watching from afar. He quietly placed a bag of fruit on a chair, turned around, and walked away. He knew that at this moment, she didn't need him anymore. 4 hours passed before the operating room light turned off. The doctor stepped out and pulled off his surgical mask. The surgery was very successful. The patient is past the critical stage. Claire nearly collapsed to her knees, but Luke caught her just in time. When Michael woke up in his hospital bed and saw his sister, the first thing he asked about was the tailoring shop. Claire tearfully scolded him for worrying about work the moment he woke up. Brenda had sent a telegram with the news. The 30 costumes had been delivered on time. The arts troupe had won first place in their performance, and new orders were pouring in. Michael smiled in relief. He looked at Luke standing outside the door. Then he turned to ask his younger sister, "Do you like him?" Claire hesitated for a beat, then softly replied, "Maybe I do." Michael smiled. "It's not just a maybe." A week later, Michael was discharged from the hospital. Claire used the bonuses and the profits from the orders to completely pay off her loan to Luke. He pulled out the IOU and returned it to her, just as he had promised. The small tailoring shop could no longer accommodate the influx of new customers. Claire used her savings to rent an old workshop near the cooperative. A new sign was hung up, Claire's Garment Workshop. Brenda was promoted to head seamstress, Susan was in charge of overlocking, and Michael managed the books and finances. On the day the workshop opened, Carter stood across the street, looking over. He waited for the crowd of guests to thin out before stepping closer. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Claire replied calmly. Carter looked at her, his voice turning hoarse. "If I truly change, could you give me a chance?" Claire looked at him. her eyes without a single ripple of emotion. I can't spend my whole life helping you feel less regretful. I left you for my own sake, and I chose him for my own sake too. Carter lowered his eyes. He understood that any further attempts to hold on to her were meaningless. I understand. I won't bother you anymore. He turned his back and walked away without looking back. That afternoon, Mrs. Miller ran frantically into the workshop. Claire, hurry home. Commander Luke has brought the betrothal gifts. Claire returned to their apartment in the compound. On the Davis family's table lay 2 stacks of fine fabric, tea, sugar, sweets, and a formal sum of betrothal money. The unit's political commissar had accompanied Luke to act as his representative. Michael sat in the seat of honor and asked, "You want to marry my sister. What about her workshop then?" Luke stood with his back straight and answered clearly, "The workshop is her career. I will absolutely never ask her to give it up." Michael nodded in satisfaction and turned to his younger sister. "I won't make the decision for you. You choose for yourself." Claire looked at Luke. "Luke, I want to speak with you in private." The two of them stepped out into the small courtyard behind the house. The afternoon sun shone down gently. Claire looked at him and honestly voiced the fear in her heart. "Your job is dangerous. I'm afraid of the waiting." Luke looked straight into her eyes, every word firm. "I can't promise to be by your side every single day, but I can promise that no matter where I go, I know exactly who I must return to." He took out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring. "I want to marry you, not so you have someone to rely on, but so that from now on, when something happens, you won't have to face it alone." Luke held the ring out to Claire. "Will you marry me?" Claire looked at the man in front of her. He had never forced her to be a stand-in, and he had never looked down on her work. She reached out her hand and slowly nodded. "I will." Luke paused for a beat, then a rare smile appeared on his face. He gently slipped the silver ring onto her finger, then softly asked, "Can I hug you?" "You can," Claire smiled. He stepped closer, pulling her completely into his embrace. In her past life, Claire had spent 15 years waiting for a man to turn his head. In this life, she was no longer waiting for anyone to choose her. She had saved her brother, opened a garment workshop bearing her own name with her own hands, and now stood before a man who had never forced her to become anyone else. Luke asked Claire, "Will you marry me?" She looked at him for a long time, then took the initiative to reach out her hand, slowly nodding. "I will." The wedding dress was a deep crimson red, featuring a mandarin collar, a cinched waist, and long sleeves. Claire cut every piece of fabric with her own hands. Brenda assembled the bodice, and Susan sewed on each tiny fabric button. "You're a workshop owner now, and you're still sewing your own wedding dress?" Mrs. Miller teased. Claire smiled. "I'm only getting married once in this life. I want to make it myself." Michael walked out and handed her a wooden box. Inside was the old measuring tape that had been with her since the very beginning. He had repaired the lock mechanism and engraved the name Claire on it. "No matter whose wife you become in the future, you must always remember that you are Claire," Michael instructed her. Claire teared up. "I will never forget." Luke walked in to try on his military uniform. Seeing her standing behind the partially drawn curtain, he hastily turned away. Susan giggled and teased him, causing his ears to turn red. The hands that were so used to holding a gun were now flustered enough to hold a stack of documents completely upside down. Before the wedding day, an anonymous letter arrived. Inside, there was only a single line. "Wishing you a lifetime of never having to wait." Claire folded the letter and tucked it into the corner of her cabinet. At the end of the compound street, Carter stood leaning against a tree. He was about to be transferred to a teaching position in a distant city. "I came to congratulate you, and I wanted to see you happy with my own eyes," he said. "Thank you," Claire replied calmly. "In the past, I always thought you would just stand there waiting," he said, lowering his eyes. "Now I finally understand that no one has the obligation to wait for someone who doesn't know how to appreciate them. It is good that you understand. I wish you happiness." "Thank you," Claire nodded, then turned and walked away. The two turned their backs and walked in opposite directions, neither of them looking back. As for Vivian, due to her instigation of vandalism and slander, she was disciplined, according to regulations. Her family had to take her away from the military compound in disgrace. The compound courtyard was shaded with flags and red paper flowers. Luke, dressed in his crisp military uniform, took Claire's hand and stepped out. She wore the red wedding dress she had designed herself, her aura radiant, beautiful, gentle, yet resolute. Michael led his sister by the hand and entrusted her to Luke. "My sister doesn't need someone to provide for her. She needs someone to build a life with." Michael said, "I understand. I will face everything together with her," Luke promised. At the back of the crowd, Carter stood in silence. He watched Claire smiling radiantly beside Luca's smile that had never once appeared when she was with him. He took out the red scarf from 15 years ago and slowly dropped it into a barrel burning paper firecrackers. The red flames swallowed the scarf. Carter turned around and walked away, leaving the military compound forever. On their wedding night, the small room was warm under the yellow lamplight. Luke placed their marriage certificate on the table. He looked at Claire, his voice deep and low. "In this life, you are my wife." Claire paused slightly. Luke stepped closer, placing the keys to her workshop and her measuring tape right next to the registration paper. "But first and foremost, you are still Claire." Claire looked up at him. "I won't stop you from running your garment workshop," he said. "My salary will cover our living expenses, and the income from the workshop is yours to manage." "Don't stay silent and make me guess," she told him. "I won't. Don't compare me to anyone else." Luke looked straight into her eyes. "There is no one to compare you to. I only want you." Claire rested her head against his chest. For the first time, she felt a sense of absolute safety. "I am Claire." "I know." 3 years later, the sign for Claire's garment workshop was replaced by a large, radiant signboard, Claire's Apparel. The double storefront shop was located right on the main street. The shop's products ranged from personal tailoring and unit uniforms to stage costumes. Brenda became the workshop manager, and Susan took on the role of head cutter. Claire had created jobs for dozens of women facing difficult circumstances in the area. In the technical area in the back, Michael stood next to a sewing machine he had just upgraded. After his successful surgery, he took additional mechanical engineering classes and officially became a textile machine engineer. "You saved me, but not so I could live on your behalf. From now on, I have my own path," he had told her. Thanks to his outstanding achievements, Luke was promoted to Deputy Division Commander. He received a sudden assignment to go on a border mission for a few months. Before the day of his departure, he looked at her with concern. Claire handed him a blue handkerchief embroidered with the word peace. "You are going because of your duty, not because you are putting someone else before me." "I will wait, but I will also live well while I'm waiting." Several months later, Luke returned safely. He stood waiting for her in front of the shop. Claire dropped her files and took the initiative to run out, throwing her arms around him tightly in the middle of the crowded street. 5 years after the day of her rebirth, Claire's Apparel opened its second branch. The whole family gathered in front of the new store. Michael, healthy and robust, stood checking the machinery system. Luke held their 2-year-old child, who was wearing an outfit designed by his mother's own hands, standing beside his wife to cut the grand opening ribbon. In the evening, when all the guests had left, Claire stood alone in the design room. A corner of the wall displayed the measuring tape engraved with her name, her very first shop lease agreement, the fully paid hospital IOU, and the couple's wedding photo. Luke walked in from behind and gently wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" Claire looked at her reflection in the mirror. "I was thinking about someone from the past, someone who always tried to become the shadow of someone else." "And now?" he asked softly. "Now, I only want to be myself." Luke smiled and gently squeezed her hand. "In this life, you are my wife. But first and foremost, you are still Claire." "I know," she smiled, gripping his hand tightly. The two of them turned off the lights in the design room and stepped out onto the main street. Behind them, the Claire's Apparel signboard shone brilliantly. The streetlights cast the shadows of the two of them walking side by side. Her shadow no longer overlapped with anyone else's. In her past life, she had spent her entire youth trying to become someone else's shadow. In this life, she lived as her own radiant light.
What a satisfying ending. Claire proved it's never too late to choose yourself. Stand on your own 2 feet, and the right person will appreciate them, the real you. What was your favorite part?